And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Today I want to talk about bread. Bread is one of those words that if you don't know what it means, you're going to miss out on a whole bunch of things. A whole bunch of things. And just in case you haven't quite got what I'm saying yet, bread in no way means bread. Jesus just told you what bread meant. He said it was his body. Now, if you look up online what they think Jesus meant by his body, they always say stupid shit, and then sometimes the church. The thing about psychopaths is they have a way of making everything about them. And if you bring up some of these issues about their toxicity or their I don't know how you would describe it. Then they tend to throw a giant fit and abuse you twice as hard. When, in fact, the term that is common, well, probably not commonly anymore, but at one point was Corpus Christi. That means the body of Christ. Now, today, our focus is not the body of Christ. I think what I'm doing is like, before I go, the body of Christ is, I probably need to build that up so that you at least understand what the body of anything means. The bread, I looked before doing this video, there was 255 bread references. So bread is out there. So let's just start in on the beginning. We're going to speak metaphorical, but to get to the metaphor, let's speak literally. For example, bread. What is bread? Bread is food. Bread comes from wheat. Bread comes from barley. Usually wheat. Bread can be leavened or unleavened. Bread it's a recipe to make bread, right? So it's flour, water, oil, heat. Now, if you follow on with what I'm saying here, you're going to start to see that all of those ingredients are in fact more words, right? They're an additional piece of this puzzle that you have to know in order to solve. Bread is a big one, so let's just break it down on its simplest definition. On its simplest definition, Christ said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Now, he's 100% right. Because he's a man. And a man is a group of people, is a nation, it's a country. Even Jesus is a man. Sort of. and that'll be later. So Jesus might be the one exception. He is and he isn't an exception to this rule. He's still a man. He's still in flesh. So flesh and bread would be the same thing, right? In a roundabout way, take the Catholic Church and the Protestants, I don't know, probably killed millions of people over a lot of little details. And one of those details was things like the Catholics still hold that it's not a metaphor, right? The bread is actually the body of Christ. And then the Protestants were like, but you mean it's like a metaphor of the body of Christ? And they said, we're going to kill all of you. And then they fought. So I guess I'm trying to think how I would fall here, because the bread is actually the body of Christ. The problem is the bread in the plate is not actually the bread of Christ. What Jesus is talking about is the body. And so what is the flesh? What is the body? What is the bread of a nation, of a man? The bread is the men, the people. The people are the bread. He said, eat this flesh. Be the people of Christ. That's what the bread is. So when he broke the people of Christ, when he broke his body, that's letting you know something bad's happening. But it had to do with men. So bread is men. Bread is people. Bread is a people. It's a group of people. So it's not one person. A one person would be kind of like dust, right? So dust is not man. But when you got the dust together and you got it wet and you made the clay was the country. So bread is also like clay. Clay and bread and flesh are nations, or groups of people. I say nation, I say country, because you speak English and these things mean those things, right? But that may not be a super accurate way of thinking about that. But so in order to have bread, you must have wheat. And in order to have wheat, you had to have grown a wheat crop. And in order to have grown a wheat crop, you had to have fields and a wheat and a harvest and a threshing. And you would have used something like a tribulus, and you would have gone through tribulation at the harvest to get the wheat, at which point you would put the wheat in a millstone and you would grind it And you would have separated the wheat from the chaff, the useful fruit from the stuff you either fed to the animals or the things that you would burn. Chaff. The wheat from the chaff. So that's part of the harvest, and the harvest implied the growing, and the growing implied the new. And we talked about last time that after the harvest was the dead. The dead is where the death is where the wheat is harvested and then processed. And so you process it and then you grind it down into flour, and the flour is mixed with water, oil, and heat. So water, I've been saying this entire time, is knowledge. So you mix people, you mix refined people, right? So not just raw, right? So it's been through a process. So there's a certain amount of like whatever that would be, civilizing, educating, indoctrinating, culturing, like whatever the milling process is. Now, stone means army, something like that. So if you grind it in its stone, it means you've basically put the people through a war. So you've part of the processing of the wheat is there's the harvest includes a threshing floor and a tribulus. And a tribulus is directly related to the word tribulation. And a tribulation means like a great stress, upheaval, what else would that mean? It would mean something like suffering, judgment. I don't love these definitions, but it's something like that. So you would have to put the people through a process. Now, also to keep in the back of your mind, is happening at the harvest time, right? So the mill and the harvesting and the grinding and that's all happening during the harvest. So the harvest would be tumultuous, bloody, culturally significant. It would involve societal shifting as you went towards a dead man and away from a living man, right? So part of the concept of going towards a dead man is a dead man has a different energy than a living man. And so the tribulation in the harvest is part of that. So to see bread would also imply that there's been wheat grown, flour made. So then you get the processed flour, the processed wheat through the tribulation. You would add knowledge to this processed person, people, the water, and then you would usually add oil, like especially the story of Elijah and the widow and her son, which once you understand these words, you can go, and that's the point of all this, is for you to go, oh, it's actually it's actually talking about something different that has nothing to do with a woman and a kid and a weird dude in the desert. Like it's about a group of people that are going, like a culture and a people, like a young man and its woman, the culture that birthed this new people, this small people that are on the verge of dying, and then Elijah, this man of God, a man of the living God, of comes in and demands a loaf of a cake of bread, or a cake, or a loaf of something. And then she's like, I don't have but one jar of oil, and somehow through a miracle the oil keeps lasting and it keeps her son alive, and then he dies, and Elijah's able to bring him back. And like, if you see that it's actually talking about like a particular moment in historical times of a up and coming group of people that were struggling, and their culture was struggling, but they took on this, like, there's energetic force, and it was able to sustain the supply of oil. And if you're King David or any other king, or I'm trying to think of Jesus was like, so when you're anointed with oil, when you have oil comes from, typically in the Bible, the oil would come from like olives. So if you had an olive and you needed olive oil, well, you can't just like pour an olive. You have to process the olives as well, and typically there's pressure. There's a squeezing pressure involved, and from this external pressure, you get the oil. And the oil, especially the good first run of the oil, is the best. So there's processes for that too. So everything has, there's a certain amount of like rough moments that you go through to get to the good moments. And that's that old good times makes bad men, and hard times, like, it's part of that concept. So from like the pressure comes the oil, and the oil is what anoints you as a king, right? Like the people deem you worthy because you've been through. And so when you add like that, whatever that is, that like the oil is the reward for going through a hard thing. Like it's the payoff for the struggle. So in some ways it's like, that's what makes you worthy. That's what makes you a man, is you've proven yourself. The oil is the proof of your worth. And there's levels of proof, and there's levels of flour, right? So there's like the good flour that's been sifted, and then there's like the regular flour and the barley. And the barley would be common, and the more refined the flour, the more excellent the people. It'd almost be like an elite, or if it was like a fighting force, it'd be like the Navy SEALs, somebody that's gone through the pressure to prove their worth. So the oil and the refined wheat and the knowledge, and then you add fire. But before I get there, oftentimes, if you take communion, you get little creepy, flavorless, God knows what that recipe is for those little cross-bearing circles. Like, I think the point would be to be unleavened. But you could have like nice fajitas or naan bread or matzah. Like, there's a million ways to make unleavened bread, but the churches have found the worst recipe in the world. And who knows? But unleavened. So leaven is just a Bible word for yeast. And yeast is in its simplest way of understanding, it's like an agent introduced that brings air, right? It's the air that creates the lift. And the air is like a product of the heights of heaven. So if you introduce like a piece of heaven to the people, the refined people, and the knowledge and the worthiness of the struggle, then you would get, so that would be like a religion. So religion is leaven. And religion on its own isn't bad. But now religion is also a woman, and religion is also associated with wine. But on a people level, it would be like, so it's not, we're not talking culture, we're talking people. And this is where it's hard, is you have to separate people from culture, because people and culture is a civilization. So we're talking civilization here, people. So then we're talking unleavened would be no priests, no religion, no state religion, no official. So when you go through Passover, what you're actually doing, in addition, so like the deeper meaning is, it's a period of time of a people with no beliefs. That's part of like the resetting process to get you from a Greek, an ancient Greek, to like a European middle-aged medieval Christian. There has to be a period where you forget about the pagan Greek beliefs. Or, not to, like the communists went through a process of like, the church was the enemy. Now, the Christians don't see it that way. They're kind of butthurt about it. But if you understood like what the communists were attempting to do, they needed to divorce one culture to get to a new one. So they went through an unleavened moment, right? So leaven is the religion. And then finally you would add heat, fire. And so if water is knowledge, then fire is, I've said it before, I say it's like technology. But if you think about what technology is, I mean, technically, like on its simplest way of thinking about it, it might be like engineering, but that's not quite right. It's more like applying knowledge. So if I have a book about cooking, that's great. But if I'm in the kitchen with an open book with ingredients, getting my hands dirty, I'm now doing the thing. And at the end of it would be a physical piece of the result of that knowledge. So like fire is technology, it's industry, it's learning and education, but knowledge is more water. So it's not strictly that. It's like application of knowledge is fire. And it's like most extreme version, it would be Saruman cutting down the forest to make the industrial fire to produce the orcs. So if you go to hell and you're in a lake of fire, like on the, to understand, the simplest way to understand that is, you are in a literal, like you're in like an ocean of technology. You're just in you're just drowning in technology. So hell is a world on fire with tech. So anyway, so when you take a refined people, you add a bunch of knowledge or a little knowledge or just the right amount of knowledge, and you take the oil from their worthy struggle. Do we want religion or not? Let's say no religion. And you throw a little technology on them. You throw a little technical engineering know-how, like a little industrial strength. What you have now is bread. And bread is the body. This is the body of Christ. So when you break that bread, it's not good. It's the end. But you've created the product to be consumed, so you would consume the dead flesh, Dionysus. And after all the flesh is consumed, up would emerge the new body. That just, so to get the new body, you would then again have to have all the ingredients for new bread. So that's bread. And so when you read a story, and this is important because so many Bible stories involve some form of that, right? Whether it's the actual bread, the consuming of bread, the making of bread, but then there's the wheat and the harvest and the, like, all of these terms are related to people, nations, civilization. So this is like the man end. So man is the bread. And the ingredients of a man, or all those things are just said. Wheat and water and oil and heat. That's what you need to make a great people. But that man needs to get married to a woman, to a culture. And so we'll talk about that. That would be more your wine. So when Jesus turns water to wine, that's the woman side of things. Well, Jesus isn't a woman, but we're not. Dear anybody who's watching this, please, I'm talking allegorical and metaphorical. So that would be the woman part. That's probably why it was happening at a wedding with his mother. A wedding. A man and a woman coming together. A wedding. That's for some people like, well, that's because Jesus was getting married secretly to Mary Magdalene. Maybe. I think once I explain Jesus, I think that becomes silly. One more thing. There was this, right now, if you're a Catholic priest, you're not allowed to be married. It's because they have forgotten what that meant at one point was to be married is for a man to take a culture or a belief. And ideally, a true man of what a priest used to be is like the ultimate knowledge center, right? So before the universities kicked off, all the knowledge was coming through the priest. So, like, ideally, a priest is not married to a religion. Ideally, a priest was ideally a man of Christ, had no religion, was unmarried. Or when you have the 144,000 male virgins, it's either like a video game convention, or that's men, that's nations, it's people groups who weren't directly tied to a religion or a culture. They were just people. Or if you have a woman who's a whore, well, that would be a culture or a belief that will just sleep with any man. You're a slut. Because this culture is not married and faithful to one group of people. It just goes everywhere. Or like the what is she called? The great prostitute that rides the beast. Well, that would be, and she says, I am no widow. She's no widow because she's not married, and she's not married, and so she just sleeps with every man. Means this culture, this thing, just wanted all the men, all the people in the whole world. It wasn't just, so ideally back in the day, like way back in the day, like the reason wars were often religious is like, if you got away from the superstition of a particular religion and you thought about what a culture is and who runs a culture, like a priest could not allow another group of priests to maintain power and still run the people properly. So the religion had to become the number one culture in this new conquered group, or the fight would be over religion, because that's kind of part of what a civilization is. So it's like a deeper thing. So while it is kind of shitty that religious wars would occur, it's like, if you just understand it, it makes sense. So then all these Bible stories about an unfaithful husband, an unfaithful wife, what it means to, like that one time the lady comes up to Jesus, and or these Pharisees come up to Jesus, and the leaven of the Pharisees, that's a verse, look it up, the leaven of the Pharisees. So the Pharisees had the leaven, the yeast, the religion, and it may not just be Christianity, right? It could be communism is a religion, capitalism is a religion. Like they're all cultural, like going to Trader Joe's and spending money on Christmas and loving your favorite influencers on TikTok and going to the mall. Like these are a woman, these are a culture. They're a shitty culture, but when the Pharisees tried to trip Jesus up and said, hey, this woman was married to a guy, but he died, and she married all his brothers and they died. Well, whose wife is she in heaven? And Jesus is like, you're all fucking idiots. I don't think you're talking literally. Okay, well, in heaven, there's no marriage. And there's a couple of interesting things with that. First off, he's like, we're talking about cultures. And second, he's like, we're talking about like the heaven culture, and we're not doing that. So that's interesting. In fact, if you can get your head around this crazy shit I'm saying, the entire Bible all of a sudden goes whoop, and you're like, oh, actually this is, and it becomes like a super awesome book. Can't put it down. So, bread. Take, eat, it is my body. Bread.